almost exactly in the middle of page Chaf Aleph, and we're going to take it from the period right there. Mastir Klal is what the line starts with. You see that, Yaakov? Okay, they're not taking. He says, "The mashal bazeh." Gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind taking your seats at this point, it would be good to start the class. You're gonna miss the mashal. Hamashal bazeh. So to understand how Hashem is the contraction does not happen as far as he's concerned, only as far as we're concerned, he gives a mashal of a Rav who's giving over information, intelligence to his student. And his interest of the Rav is that the leanings, the intellectual leanings of the student should be like his. Notice he should basically convince him of something, teach him something, and make him think and go in the ways of the Rav. Amnam, however, but in order for the student to actually get the ashpa to come inside of him, right? Because the Rav has things to say that are beyond the capacity of the student to understand. That's why he's the Rav, right? He's coming with information the student doesn't have, and it's like even ein aruch, incomparable to the student understanding. You're trying to teach him something that's like beyond his complete capacity. So if he wants the student to be able to internalize it, this is actually the process. We'd have to assume that this is the way that the Rebbe teaches us Torah, right? Because to understand that there's a teacher who's standing in a position which is be'ein aruch to the students, it helps to think of the Rebbe. Because like we said in the previous chapter, in chapter 11, there is one in a generation whose soul comes from Atzilus, and his whole perception of reality is like beyond the experience of separation, and his Torah is complete in this way where it's mamash, he's like seeing God. So he's trying to explain to us like little ants, and it's not a simple thing. Moshe Rabbeinu has been working on it for generations, right? So it's truly like an incomparable thing. It's almost like the Creator trying to speak to the creation. How does this go about? So the first move in this operation is that he actually has to remove the entirety of what's in his mind. Whatever he was gonna say is a no-go, because it's completely beyond the ability to receive. So the first thing he has to do is remove all of what's in his mind. And he has to now introduce to himself a light of intellect. Mamtzi means to find. It's like a matzia. He's to find a new piece of information that is in accordance with the experience of the makabel. Let me give you an example. The Arizal speaks about this, and the question that the Arizal asks and answers over there is, why did Hashem have to remove? If everyone knows how the story goes, where Hashem removed all the infinite light from the makom panoi, the halal, the empty space. And now we had sort of just emptiness, and then he drew back what's called the kav, right, which is a little line of light from the original, and now that little line of light comes into the empty space, and it starts to basically fill the space with the worlds, but all those worlds that are going to be created now are not created from the infinite light, they're created from just one line, like let's say 1% of the 100% of the light that came is what comes back to fill the world, and that's the light of all the worlds. It's Silus B'Ritzur, every world. So the question he asks over there is, why did he have to remove 100% of the light and then bring back 1%? Why couldn't he just remove to begin with 99% and leave 1% in there? And the answer is
because if you would have left the light, then it would not have had the attribute of Balei Gur. It would have had the attribute of completeness. It never lost its quality of being the light that was afforded since.
Very good, right? That whatever light was in there was all of a certain mahus. It was of a certain quality of infinite and beyond the worlds. So even if you leave a little bit of infinite, it's going to be problematic to create finite worlds. So by removing it all and then introducing a ray, the notion of that new ray is it actually has a beginning and an end, right? He starts the ray. And it went through the process of tzimtzum, which there was like a break in that light and a beginning. So now you're dealing with a light which has a beginning and an end to a certain degree, right? And so the light which is now introduced is actually of a completely different quality. And exactly what he's saying here when it comes to teaching the student, right? He has this, the mind of Atzilus has all this infinite light. He has to remove all of it. not 99% of it. He has to completely make himself like a blank and reorient in accordance with the capacities of the student, and then bring back a new light, which is not the light that he had before. It's now a light which is tailor-made to go into the mind of a finite being, i.e. his students, right? So that's stage number one. That's called the tzimtzum, in the mind of the Rav.
What does the word shakol mean?
Seichel.
Oh,
Or seichel, right? The light of intellect, which is now in accordance with the receiver.
okay.
I like questions like that. I mean, you're reading along. Everyone should be asking me tons of questions like that because I'm reading word for word, so you can actually learn the words as we go. And in this light that he now brings back, he makes many contractions, the helmos and concealments. So in other words, now this little 1% ray that he's drawn back, it doesn't stay one ray. That ray itself, he's got to work with it and condense it. Even the little piece that he brought back, which for the sake of the student is still too much. So that has to undergo contractions and concealments, so that at the end of this big ride, he can actually come up with something which is fit to be digested by the students. So you have to think that whenever the Rebbe is teaching these unbelievable, my Marim is sitting there for hours teaching us Torah, that's not really what he's thinking, right? He has like a whole nother thing that can't even be spoken. He has to contract it down into like a finite piece and then contract that infinitely until it finally comes out to us, something we can actually understand. But this is an example, this is a mashal which helps us understand how all the contractions are certainly only happening as far as the receiver is concerned, right? Because it's not like the teacher doesn't suddenly know all the information he had before. It's preposterous, right? By him contracting it and withholding it from the student, he's obviously it's not going away, right? He still has all that brilliant information. He's just creating a space where he's not allowing all of his massive intellect to sort of fill that space. But it's like actually, Yaakov, like what you were saying, like inside of this ray, right? He then can play with it and make contractions and remove it, but it's all happening inside of his essence where he's still in full presence, even though he's created a vacuum where he's not showing that the full presence of his mind, right? Right? But for the Rav, there's no contraction at all. In other words, if at that very moment when he's sort of holding back, he still is in full possession of the entire Atzilus level idea that he had before. That the example from here is understood above. Kiviyachol, so to speak. The chlalos in tzimtzum, that the whole what we call tzimtzum, hu rak legabeinu. This is the mashal this is the mashal, right? Whenever you're going to try to explain to someone, I don't know why it hasn't come up before in this class, actually. It has throughout the years, but like in this context, because this is the perfect mashal to explain how Hashem is really there at the same time where he's not there, right? Just like the teacher does not suddenly forget all the information when he's contracting it and holding it back while teaching the student that which he can understand.
This is like in reference to the kav.
This is in reference to the tzimtzum, right, and the kav together. Like, so in other words, when the kav comes out, which is like this tiny idea that's fit for the student, it doesn't mean that the infinite light, which is the Rab's original idea, is not actually right there in that same place, because the Rab didn't forget it.
Is there also like in this mashal, how there's like Mishpia and Makabel? Is there also something like that in when it comes to the Tzimtzum and the Kav? Does it have to be like that to be like the Kubal by us, basically?
By creation.
By creation?
Because creation is finite. Whether it's the creation of the world of Atzilus, Bri, Yetzirah, or Sia, in some capacity, there's a thing there, right? And so Hashem is infinite. So he can't explain infinite to a thing because the infinite won't fit into the box of a thing.
Wasn't there like nothing at that point though?
Yeah, but he wants to create now. Right now, his interest is he wants to have creations. So, so to speak, he's creating the makabel. That's the difference. In the analogy, the makabel is already there. In the nimshal, this is how he creates the makabel, right? So he wants there to be a makabel. So he can't have a makabel. He can't have his cake and eat it too. He can't have a makabel and continue to maintain the status of infinite light. So he removes the infinite light, but we're trying to explain, does he really remove it? No, just like a teacher doesn't remove his intelligence when he hides it from the student, so too, the full-blown Orient Sof is still there, even in the midst of this space, and even in the midst of now finding this little kav, which is something which is relevant to the makabel. It doesn't in any way deflect the full-blown revelation of the Orient Sof being there simultaneously. Just like it would be preposterous to say that because the teacher is holding back information from the student, he doesn't know it anymore. Right? It's not concealed to the giver, it's only concealed to the receiver.
Okay.
Get it?
Yeah.
You have a question?
Yeah. What does the word dugma mean? And,
Example. I love this. Yeah, and what else? Kiviyach means so to speak. So to speak.
So dugma is
Example. Example from this is understood above, so to speak, because when we say above, we don't, it's always so to speak. We're not giving Hashem property attributes of humans, but so to speak, it would be something like this: that the whole inyan of tzimtzum is rak legabeinu, only for us. Aval legabi yisbareh, but compared to him, in relationship to him, hari ein hatzimtzum mastir klal. The tzimtzum is absolutely no concealment at all. There's nothing hidden, nothing goes away, right? It's all, so to speak, just for the sake of his ability to allow us to experience something, but he has lost nothing of the, and that's the answer to the original question, how there's no change in the world from before he created it to after created it, because he's like whatever little ray is now considered to be the world, because it's now finite and can experience itself. First of all, that ray was always there. So there's nothing changed on the standpoint of the world. The ray, the finite aspect of creation was always there. But the idea is that it never actually even happened, so to speak, because our problem is here he was before creation and now something happened. Nothing actually happened. The ray was always there. The only thing that happened was he removed infinity from the experience of the ray. So it looks like, and it's actually true. It's not just like a fantasy. We suddenly got a self-perception. But it still didn't really happen as far as he's concerned, because the infinite light is still in that very same place and the ray is simultaneously nullified inside of infinity. So the infinite and the finite were always there. The only difference is that at first, before creation, the infinite was, so to speak, showed to the finite and therefore negated the experience of finite. And after creation, the infinite was withheld from the experience of the finite, but didn't go away. Right? And therefore we suddenly experience ourselves. But he is exactly the same before creation and after creation. Does it make sense to everybody?
Does Hashem exist in nothingness?
What's the sound of one hand clapping? What do you mean exactly? Does he exist in nothingness?
He did Simpson.
Oh yeah.
But does he exist? Is nothingness still considered Hashem?
We had a very, very, very long, hour-long conversation about that yesterday. And the answer is a resounding yes, right? There were those who wanted to misunderstand the writings of the Arizal, who said that he's actually not in nothingness, in which case they had to rearrange all of Jewish theology to understand how there's something that can exist where Hashem's not in it. And the Alter Rebbe sort of straightened them out and explained that when you're seeing nothingness, you're actually seeing a higher level of Hashem's revelations, not a no Hashem. What you're seeing in the nothing is you're seeing no light. But that doesn't mean you're seeing no God. And that part of God which you're seeing when there's no light is the source of the light, that which is beyond revelation, which is actually essence. So the nothing winds up being a very, very big something, right? And it also kind of realigns Jewish theology, again, like how we understand the nature of good and bad and evil and so forth, that there is no such thing that exists without God in it. Even the worst of all things is actually in possession of not only God, but the highest levels of God, just in a concealed state. Okay, so going back inside,
So far, we're on.
where the line starts, Ein. Did you also have a question, or you got it?
No, we're
Okay.
yeah.
Ein hatzimtzum master klal. Yeah.
Is it nothing something?
If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it,
Yes, false.
does it make a sound?
Yes, it does. Makes a very large sound.
Okay, so isn't nothing something? Yeah, that's kind of what he's saying, basically, right? That the nothing, it's what it comes down to is the biggest something. But because it's beyond any expression, form, etc., it's actually God, we call it nothing, right? Ein Tzimtzum master clause. So that's the line we're on, right? This contraction does not actually conceal anything from Hashem. Ube'emes yuvan gamze. And in truth, we can also understand the gam legabenu, that even as far as we're concerned, in other words, on our side of the tzimtzum, hini tzimtzum harishon, the first tzimtzum, v'kol tzimtzum deseder ishtalshelus. Right? This is a big turn in the mimer that we're about to say, that the first tzimtzum, which is like the original one where he emptied everything. And then all the tzimtzum of the Seder Ishtalshlus, this is what are those? When he reintroduces the light, the kav, then it goes into a state of minimization over and over again, and that's called all the tzimtzumim of the Seder Ishtalshlus. There's a huge difference between the first tzimtzum and all other tzimtzumim. I hope you can see that now. The first tzimtzum is that there was light and he removed it all entirely, it goes away, right? He makes a space. All the other tzimtzumim is that after introducing the light, the next levels of tzimtzum, which is all the rest, infinite numbers of them, they do not take away the light entirely. They just reduce it, minimize it, and make it smaller and smaller levels of array, right?
Wasn't it taken away the first time though?
The first tzimtzum is different from all the rest in that it takes it away entirely.
So how are they reducing it?
Because then there's the reintroduction of the kav, and upon the kav, all these other tzimtzumim happen. So that's why the Arizal draws it like a circle with sort of like a pie-shaped thing that's coming into the middle. Because the idea is that in the top of this, there's more light, and it gets smaller and smaller until it gets to the bottom point, which is in the middle of the circle where creation is happening.
And it's not like real light; it's just him, right? It's God.
It's not physical light that you can measure with scopes, but we use light as a metaphor, right? So it's the divine light, so to speak. What are you going to call it?
Yeah.
Light is used as a metaphor. You could say the divine water, the divine air, but they use light because of many different reasons in Kabbalah, that it's like the best thing we have in the physical world to ascribe to this process. So going on, what we're saying is, again, this big turning point. So the first tzimtzum and all the other tzimtzum of the Seder Ishtalshelus, harihem bishvil hagiloi. So this is a huge concept, which means that the tzimtzum is actually for the sake of revelation. So even the concept of, even though we said before that to us it's a concealment, but not for Hashem, fine. But even to us, where it's a concealment, is it really a concealment? It turns out that the concealment is actually an act of revelation. It's for the sake of revealing something. It's not just that he's hiding. So when Hashem, so to speak, hides and makes something look bad, look dark, in absence of himself, he's not actually trying to take himself away. Now in Kedusha, there's a whole mimer called Mavdilim Lechem. I think it's called in Torah Or. And it's talking about the idea of there being curtains in the Beis Hamikdash, right? So you have the Holy of Holies, it has a curtain. And then you have the holy, and you've got curtains and doors, and there's all these different chambers and doors and curtains until you finally get to the outside. And even then, you're still in the Azara, and even then, you're still in the Harabais. So there's the idea of contractions and concealments from holy and going out inside the realm of Kedusha itself. And only until you get, so to speak, outside of Eretz Yisrael into there's this it says there's 10 levels of Kedusha inside of Eretz Yisrael. Then you go Chutz La'aretz, and then the contractions get much more intense, and they become concealing klippa type of contractions. But the point I'm trying to make is, when you contract something and reduce it, on the face of it, you're actually revealing something. Take, for example, like a prism. A prism takes this sort of beam of light, and it breaks it down. And contracts the intensity of the original beam, but in doing so, it actually shows you something that you didn't know was there before. Red, blue, green, all the colors of the rainbow suddenly appear when you're seeing those colors. You're only seeing those colors because of a contraction that took place. So the contraction itself is actually for the sake of revealing something to you. When Hashem is removing himself, he's actually allowing certain things which were inside of infinity to suddenly appear and take shape. And now we know so much more about God than we did before, because it was like this ubiquitous overriding light which did not allow us really to see anything. So sometimes there's this concept that you could be blinded by the light, right? The light itself hampers your ability to see. So the contraction is actually a revelation. And that's what he's saying here, that In other words, when I was talking about the Kodesh Kodashim, just like that inside the Holy of Holies, it's just like the ark. But suddenly there's a curtain, and suddenly you see, wait, it's not just the ark. There's a menorah, there's a table, there's a mizbeach. Happens to be today's parsha, all these things, right? In the Chumash. So anyway, the concealments are for the sake of the revelations, where we left off. And he says, Dilios the Iker Inyan Atzimtzum, that since the main content of the Tzimtzum, who bichdei is kabel kanal b'mashal, it's in order so that the student can understand, like we said in the mashal, like we're going with this mashal. Why does the Rav decide to suddenly hide all this information for you? Because he's trying to hide from you? Right? No, he's busy teaching you something. He's trying to get some information in your little head. But the problem is, his head is too big. So when he makes the contraction, what is he doing it for? It's only in order to reveal. The purpose of Tzimtzum is to reveal. And therefore, again, we can, just on the simple pshat, the Tzimtzum is not a concealing agent. It is a revelatory agent. Even as far as we're concerned, in other words, he's actually showing us something, not hiding something. When he makes the tzimtzum, here's the ka. That's also a revelation. The only problem is, while yes, we are being revealed something, i.e., the kav, we are not experiencing the Orein Sof, right? So he has to hold something back in order to reveal that. And even this level of the inner light, which is like the kav, the or panimi means the light that goes inside of something, i.e., it's been contracted. And this is the light, which is the life force, which is enlivening all of existence. There are certain things that are being enlivened by that ray that do not experience that it is a divine life force. So in other words, even though the purpose of this ray is to reveal something, not to conceal it, it could be that in the end of this ray, it gets so small that that which he's revealing doesn't appreciate the fact that it is actually part of the revelation. It's experiencing itself as disconnected. Even though the whole process is that he's showing you something, at the bottom of the Seder Ishtalshalus, when the contractions get so deep, it could be that even though it's a life force from God, which is enlivened at that thing, it could experience itself as not experiencing God.
Oh,
Yeah.
What does the word bishvil mean?
For
And
the sake of.
and near gosh.
Field, also like ain't no near, it's not felt. Hare. Okay, I said that line. Now, even though every entity, even at the bottom of the Seder Vishtalshus, like us, we do feel that we have a life force. In other words, we're like in possession of our life. And the obvious proof of that is that, like, when it's in jeopardy, you're like freaking out all of a sudden because you're not like thinking about the fact that you're alive all the time. But suddenly, should you realize that it might end, you're fully aware of your actual life force, right? So the fact is, everything does experience that it's alive, that it has a life force, hamachayo, so it's enlivening it. And it knows clearly, sha'ikaru achayos, and he knows that the life force is the main thing. In other words, a person's not going to be satisfied knowing that his body will remain after he dies. That's because he knows that's not the main thing. It's just holding the life force. So everybody's aware that their mamash being that they are life inside. They know the body is really nothing like of them. And the main thing is their life force. The problem is not that they don't realize they're alive. The problem is they don't realize that life force is godly life, right? You suddenly get into this situation where it goes back to this concept of para, right? The flow is coming from Gan Eden. Yaakov gave him a bracha. The Nile is rising to him, and he says, "The river's mine. I made myself." So there's a flow coming in, making him, and he's aware that there's this bracha happening. It's just that he thinks it's his bracha. And so do we. We think that it's my life. And if you could get sort of a little bit of clarity, maybe once a day, a little Hasidus class in the morning, to realize this is not your life. This is a divine energy which happens to be inside of you, and that's what's giving you your life. It's God. It's a godly ray. That's all it is. But we're in such a slow part of the Ishtalsh. There's so many contractions that we experience the life, but not the source of the life. Ubifrat b'riboy helmos v'estarting. Particularly when you have such an abundance of concealments and hidings, shumis alu mistaser, that he hides and contracts, mimedrega from level to level, ad sheyachol lomer li yori, right? That you can get to the point where Paro says, the river is mine. Or kochi v'otzim yadai chuli, or for example, if you would translate that, maybe you don't feel like you're Paro, then you're a businessman who says, I'm so smart, I made all this money. I pulled this thing off because my own strength, my own power. Even though you're saying Baruch Hashem on every business day, like we said before, you have this, you're disconnected from the flow, and you feel like you took it over. We said even as a student of Torah can have this experience when it comes to like thinking with the intellect, right? That he came up with an idea and he disconnects the fact that it's a godly intellect that's placed in his head. There's this whole idea of just the thickness of the kli, specifically at our station of the Hishtalshalus, where it's the worst, right? It just feels all of a sudden like we understand that this is happening from God. We kind of feel like it's sort of cut off and God sort of left it to us at this level. All this is from the concealment of the or beyoser, an unbelievable level of contraction. Ad shecholios mocho gas kazeh, to the point that your mind can be so thick, she'enu yodeo margish that teva hu elokus, that you don't know and you don't feel that nature is God. Right? This is basically what these are the rules of nature. It just operates on its own. Like it's like he's saying you're like a bonehead to have such a thought in your mind like that. To not understand, just like remove the seal a little bit and realize that this whole thing is much being enabled and enlivened, and it's the end of a huge process of divine flow. And all these natural laws are really divine laws, right?
Bro, what does the word margish mean?
Again, it's the same one as nirgash, to feel.
Right.
To call ze hu bekoach ein sof lasos helmos vasterim ke'elu. And all of this comes from, right, the fact that you can sit here and feel this way, it comes from the ein sof that has the ability to contract itself, right? This is the opposite of what we've been saying before. Before we were saying that no matter what level of contract, before, in other words, in chapters 12 and 13, we were saying no matter what level of contraction you are, the Ein Sof has the power to be right there in that place and be unaffected and not mixed in. Now we're saying the opposite. We're saying you're able to experience yourself, mamash as Paro Melech Mitzrayim, and totally different and disconnected from the truth of the life force, because the Ein Sof has the power to contract itself and remove itself infinitely to the point that it leaves you there thinking that you're all by yourself because of its power of removal. And that's not the Ein Sof that's lamata mata. That's from the power of the Ein Sof that goes lamai lamai, that goes up and away and makes you feel totally independent. So when you think about, like, again, the contradiction there, up and away is a higher form of Ein Sof than lower, than going down. And yet, what is its result? It makes you feel totally independent, like Paro Melech Mitzrayim. Again, in the evil is actually the symbol and the product of the higher form of life. Of light. What's that?
What's that mean?
Because we're saying that, remember we were saying before, like in the place of the darkness is actually the essence. Because there isn't a place where there's nothing. And if there's nothing, what are you really seeing? You're seeing an absence of light, but not an absence of God. Because you can't have an absence of God, right? If there's a place, like these guys said, I was joking with them, they said all very good things. Even nothing is a thing, right? And the idea is that, but it's not a thing you can touch, taste, feel, right? But it's what is that place of nothing? It's the absence of light. Well, it's like the sun. If the sun would stop, the sun can't stop shining light. But if in theory the sun could stop shining light, you wouldn't see it anymore. But it would still be the ball of the sun, right? So in this case, it's godliness stops shining as light. You don't see it anymore. But it doesn't mean it went away, right? So in that place where you don't see and it looks like an absence, it's actually a higher thing, because what's higher? The light coming off the sun or the sun itself?
So in the beginning, or maybe not even the beginning, but there was always light. There was never just a state of like.
Right.
darkness.
That's how it's described to us. The Arizal describes the situation that before Hashem emanated worlds, the would-be space was already filled with an infinite light.
And so when you say you're going like up,
right,
and you get this independence, doesn't that work the opposite way? And like the higher worlds, they feel it more that they're connected to Hashem and they're less independent.
Not going up in terms of like climbing up the stairs of the state of Rishtal, going up in terms of the light deciding to either shine that way or that way. When the light shines, now when the light shines down, it's still, like what we said before. Let's go, not the major tzimtzum, but now we're in the kav, right? And now you have many tzimtzums. You have a tzilus, bria, tzir, nasiya. So if you go up, you're going to get higher and higher levels of revelation, right? But the idea is that you're still dealing with a light, which is essentially coming down. The fact you have any revelation at all is because there is a kav coming down. The kav is still like an aspect of the Orient Sof that's going down below and showing you something. If there's a kav of light, it means that the direction is going to show something, not to conceal something. So the idea is there's a different light simultaneously happening at the same time. While this kav is happening, the Orient Sof is going also in a different direction. And the idea is that it's the power of this Orient Sof is to remove itself. Is that it is removed from anybody's intelligence. This is what it means, right? The idea that the Orient Sof is lamai adin kates. It goes infinitely high. It means no matter where you're standing, right? I can go higher than you. So its chiddush is that it can remove itself. So the chiddush that it removes itself from Atzilus is not as big of a chiddush as the amount of removal that happens when it removes itself almost entirely from Para. So that's actually showing on the real power of the Hashem's ability to remove himself, to go infinitely away and up inside of himself. It winds up leaving something which doesn't experience Hashem at all. So that is most seen at the bottom of the Seder Yishdashtus.
How is that shining the other way? What does that mean?
It's like, for example, if you would, well, he's going to explain, but I'll give you a little heads up because it's complicated. The mashal that he brings in the next chapter is as follows. If you were, let's say, a teacher, a rav, and you are suddenly faced with, you're supposed to give a lesson plan. So you come in, you've prepared your lesson plan, you're ready to go, and it's all good. Then you start teaching, and the student asks you a question which was not really in your lesson plan. They stump you in a certain sense. So what do? You get quiet for a second, and you start thinking. Now, before when you were thinking, the more you thought, the more they received. Your thinking was basically projecting to them. Now, you're now thinking into yourself, and the more you think, the further away you get from them. Because you're going deep, 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 deep into your own ideas, and the more you do that, the more you're in an area which is completely irrelevant to them. Like, you've now got to go back into like the mamish science of the thing, and like this, the higher you go, like trying to figure out like the root of their question, you're going up and away, so to speak, into the recesses and the depths of yourself. So that's kind of like the idea of the light that's going up, right? We have this in ourselves. You can either project light, but sometimes you have to bring what's called or choser and like go in. The light goes inwards, like deep concentration, and the more you shine that light, the further away it gets from being understood by the people around you, right? It's a light. It's not like a concealment. It's a deep penetrating intellect, but the more it happens, the further away you actually get from being understood from the people around you. That's the analogy that's used here.
I guess it also makes sense too, because if a student asks a question like that, they might start to think that like, oh, like I'm the one that like thought of this question. That,
right. It gives him a certain yeshus. Right. It produces the yeshus. It makes him feel suddenly like he's got something going here. Yeah, very good. So moving along, we started on time today, so we have a long class, Baruch Hashem. All right, so not exactly on time, but closer to on time. Okay, so he says, this is the power of the Ein Sof to go and contract itself higher and higher. Just like the expression of the light going in this direction, right, outward, is can go infinitely, in other words, to the lowest of all levels. Like we said, that even in the midst of Paro Melech Mitzrayim, there's still the infinite Orient Sof, which is not mixed in with him so he can experience it, but it's there. Nothing can stop it from expressing itself to the lowest levels. And that's in the koach of the Ein Sof Dafka. In other words, only Hashem can be shining infinity in a place which is the most finite and disconnected. That's kind of the idea of the light that's going lower and lower. So too, there's also only within the power of the Ein Sof to conceal yourself and to make that place which looks disconnected from Hashem in an infinite way by going further and further and further up and away and allowing there to be more and more levels of separateness of creation until infinity, right? So both these qualities that he can make the finite and is only comes from the Ein Sof, and that he can actually simultaneously hold the place of the finite also comes from only from the power of the Ein Sof. Dezeu deksiv achein ata kel mistater. And this is what it says, that yes, you are a God who hides himself. The niggin that goes on this pasuk. Dezeh actually is a very deep story in my own life. You know that we had Schwartzy's Yortzeit on the 12th of Shvat. We had a Farbrengen about it. The day, this was a niggin that it was recorded, him singing it. Just like a few days before he passed away, and it went around like the whole internet, him singing this song, Achin Ata Kel Mistater, and so everyone was like, and then he passed away, and I got the news of it while I was learning Basi Lgani. It was Yud Beis Shvat on this pasuk. It was much like a crazy like visitation, and then we all sang this niggin by his grave at the burial. It was like very intense. So I can't help but to say that when I get here. Anyway. So he says, this is what the pasuk means. You are a God who conceals himself. This that you contract yourself with so many hidings, right? It says, ata kel nistater. You, in other words, the essence of you, only you could do something like this, right? No lower being can basically go so deep an inward like reflection as to create this experience of independence outside of you. That comes from Ata. That's a power of the essence. The keshem shechesed kel kol hayom. That just like, again, flipping it back and forth, he's trying to explain, just like the chesed of Kale is all day long, right? Which means Yom hu b'chinas Giloy, chesed of Kale kol hayom, that all revelation only can come from the Atzmus. There's two things that can only come from the Atzmus. Infinite revelation, that infinity will be everywhere, even in a place of finite. Only you could do that. And also Ata Kale Mistater, only you can create the experience of finite and remove yourself when you're actually there. Right, so Chesed Kel Kol Hayom, the Chesed of God, which is all the day representing outward revelation, Kumo Agilehu Chesed, Shem Kel, just like, and all revelation is called Chesed, which Chesed corresponds with the name Kel, the divine name. So like, right, Elokim is Gevura, Kel is Chesed, Havai is Tiferes. So the pasuk says, Chesed Kel Kol Hayom, that all goes very much together. Chesed is revelation, Kel is the name of God, the Sphira, which corresponds to the Sphira of Chesed, and Kol Hayom means all day, which means revelation, right? So too, Mash Mistater Misal, this that you contract yourself, Hu B'chinas Atamam. So just like the first one is God, this one is also, the contraction is also you, godliness in its essence. In the Sefer Yetzirah, again, Avraham Avinu just sort of wrapped all this together in simple language, and he says this is what's called the Omek Rom, the depths of the heights, and the depths, Omek Tachas, the depths of the depths. We're going in and out, simultaneously in two directions. Again, the Jewish star, one triangle going up, one triangle going down, one on top of the other, happening simultaneously. The Keshem Omek Tachas, just like going infinitely deep, in other words, like down, Shuagilu Bispashtus, which is an outward revelation and extension until the lowest possible levels, is in the power of the Ein Sof. So too, the Omek Rom, the ability to go infinitely higher and like introspect and therefore pull yourself away and in your wake leave the experience of independence, Eloi Acher Eloi, level after level, it's also only in the power of the Ein Sof Dafka. It's only in God's power to have so many contractions, and that's finally what it means as we conclude the third mimer in Basi Lgani. This is what we started off to try and understand in this mimer, the Or Ein Sof Lamaila Ad Ein Kates, right? That it is the Or Ein Sof which goes infinitely high. But why not use the last 4 minutes to start the next chapter? Okay, so we're going to just dip into, now this is a mimer which was, remember, how does the whole system work, right? The Frierdiker Rebbe, he set up 4 Maimarim to be a hemshech, a continuation of Maimarim, and they were supposed to be delivered on the day that he wound up passing away. So the one was on Yud Shvat, one was on Yud Gimel Shvat, one was for Purim, and one was for Beis Nisan. What's unique about Beis Nisan besides your wedding day? Mazel tov. You got a whole mimer for your wedding day. What is unique about what happened on Beis Nisan?
You said yesterday, the Friedrich.
Right, it says Yortzeit of the Rebbe Rashav, and the day that the Friedrich Rebbe became the Rebbe. Right, so it's interesting that we have this mimer in here, right? Because what's all Basi Lgani about? It's like the day the previous Rebbe passed away, and the first mimer of the Rebbe. So that whole Indian is actually like contained inside of the last mimer of Basi Lgani from the previous generation, because this is a mimer for the initiation of the generation of the sixth generation. And it starts like this. Hine, Beis inyanim elu de orein sof l'mayla adin ketz l'mata adin tachlis. These two concepts of the light going in both directions. Hin beis medregus b'orein sof baruchu. They're two levels inside the orein sof. V'yesh hefresh gadol b'neihem, and there's a huge difference between the two of them. Temash orein sof l'mayla adin ketz. That the orein sof goes infinitely high into his depths. It's a different type of light. It's a light which is concealed, and it's not in the category of what's called hamshacha. Hamshacha means to be drawn, right? And this is a type of light which is not in the category called drawn out, like the sun, that like its light is drawn out. This is a light which does not have that title going on. It's an unusual thing. You don't really hear about a light like this. And it will never come to a status of revelation to the world, right? In other words, it's not intended to be a light which shines. Antu ila al kol iloim, stima al kol stimin, shusasum be'etzim. And the idea is, this is what we say, that you are that which is higher than all high things, hidden from all hidden things, which means it's essentially hidden. Let's explain that for a second. Higher than all high things, right? Means there's all this thing called high things, which means you can go higher and higher and higher and higher and higher inside the state of Ishtalshalus, right? But all those levels of light that you're going to hit, they're all still what we call in the category of hamshacha. They are drawn lights. So even if you're atzilus, which means you're or let's start with bria. Let's say you're in bria, right? So there's the light of bria, which is a light which is shining. So now we're going to say that there's higher things than you, right? There's something called the light of Atzilus, which Bria cannot see, and therefore it's in a state of concealment compared to Bria, right? The light of Atzilus. But it's still in the category of Hamshacha, because in the world of Atzilus, it's shining. It's still a shining light. So there's certain lights that you can't see them, and but they're still shining in an outward fashion, just not to you. But then there's something called, you're the higher than all high things, concealed amongst all concealed things, which means that there's a certain end to that process where the light is no longer just hiding from some people, but it's revealed to others, right? Which means it's high. It's actually higher than the whole concept of high things. It's concealed beyond the whole concept of concealed things, which means it's essentially high and it's essentially concealed to everyone and forever and always. It doesn't have like an expression which just some people can't see. It's equally held back from all. And that's what we said in the beginning of the Maim, if you recall, that what happens, when you have iskafi, you reveal the level of light which is equal in all the worlds. This is the light we're talking about. A light which is equal in all the worlds means a light which is equally concealed to everybody because it doesn't even come into the category of revelation. Or ain't social lamayla. We'll stop here.
What's the